What's up, traders? Matt from the Trade Brigade here with your weekend crypto report, where, as always, I do a technical analysis and give you my thoughts on the coins listed up above. Just as a quick reminder, we have narrowed it down to the core 5 coins right here, and we will add back altcoins accordingly when and if the charts start flipping back into uptrends. I don't really think it's too useful to be looking at the same downtrend over and over and over again, so we'll stick to the core 5 for now. With that being said, let's jump right into this thing with our Bitcoin daily time frame here. What do we see on the charts in front of us from a levels and trend perspective, pattern perspective, all of that stuff? Certainly, in last week's video, we had a pretty I don't want to say impassioned rant, but some logical thoughts on the value of Bitcoin. And we were talking about, as we got into the technicals, this bear flag that was forming, the lack of follow through up and over the hammer candle high. It just didn't really strike us as an impressive bottom at the time. And it still feels that way to me. We certainly did clean up the lows of the bear flag pattern in here, and we've snapped back into the consolidation. But from a trend perspective, we're really not going to get a new daily uptrend until we breach this level, the sets of highs, right around in here. And it's pretty close. Let's just round up here and call it 23K Bitcoin. That's where things could start to improve just a little bit, and a new daily uptrend could be spurred. Now, don't get me wrong, our target is just going to be at the resistance trend line. And if we take a quick look at the weekly time frame, so giving some perspective here, don't forget that even if we do make it to the resistance trend line, the weekly trend has certainly not flipped, and we are not out of the woods from the aggressive breakdown that we've been seeing over the past little bit, right? Usually we mark a new lower low, we rally or go sideways until we hit the trend line, right? So boom, lower low, sideways until we hit the trend line, new lower low, sideways until we hit the trend line, right? So is that going to happen again is the question here. And even when and if we get to the resistance trend line, are we going to fall back down in the grand scheme of things from that weekly time frame that we were just discussing? So I don't think Bitcoin's out of the woods just yet, but I will give credit where credit is due. This does look like it is starting to form. Let me actually adjust this so it's a little easier on the eyes. There we go, center stage on the screen. It does look like we're starting to build out a small set of higher lows on this daily time frame. So nonetheless, just to recap here, anything that kind of hangs out in here, I'd be pretty neutral in Bitcoin, not wanting to take an aggressive long or short per se, if you're into shorting crypto. But then after that, the long would be up and over that 23K level that we just identified for a move into the resistance trend line. That is, of course, your primary target. If it goes higher, obviously it's all about the back test of the major flush point from up here at $28,650 per coin. Again, I'm not forecasting that we get here in the course of the upcoming week. If anything, maybe there starts to become a small break up and over this horizontal level, but one step at a time. You have the numbers to be watching out for in front of us. If this fails back down underneath the 19,800 mark, obviously that fails to hold this as a new set of higher lows. And again, I would be neutral to bearish in this segment of the chart as well. The next downside target is around $16,250 per coin to come into as a level coming from. If I scrunch up the chart, you'll remember it was a break and retested level from in the past. No need to rehash that on today's stream. With that being said, we'll move along and get into Ethereum. What's going on in Ethereum? This one's actually starting to look a little bit more promising. Again, I will always give credit where credit is due. And in the short term, it does look or appear though that we are starting to put in a little bit of an inverted head and shoulders, simply because we're closer to this kind of neckline and level right around in here after a clear higher low on the daily time frame. So again, if we were to look at this, the hourly might be a little bit too long of a time frame, but I don't know. Let's just try to take a peek here. So here's left shoulder, here's head, here is right shoulder, right? If you draw in a neckline, I believe we've technically breached it. If you were to do something like that, that's kind of your neckline, right? So touch number 1, touch number 2 sets the anchor, and now we're through that neckline here, putting in an hourly bull flag actually with some nice consolidation at the high. So again, I'll give credit where credit is due. On the smaller time frames, it does look like there could be a miniature little reversal here. But if we go back on up to the daily time frame, pop this on auto real quick, what we'll find is that, again, our target is still just going to be the resistance trend line, the back test of the flush point up here around 1692. And in the grand scheme of things, if we go to a weekly time frame, obviously that does not change the weekly trend from being down. We've set a new significant lower low from here to here, clearly, and we obviously don't have a breach of the resistance trend line yet for any sort of higher high to be gunning for. So with that being said, again, in the longer time frame perspective, Ethereum's clearly still in a downtrend, okay, which is why we haven't also been gung-ho about adding in those altcoins back into our watch list. So we'll continue to monitor this. I would say the more conservative break, the one that you might be able to capture after this video comes out, would be up and over 1250. Could be an entry point. Obviously, you want to continue to see higher lows form on the daily time frame if we're going to make it to that resistance trend line in the first place. If this pattern is going to fail, it would require taking out this set of lows right here from the right-hand shoulder. That number is going to be around 1050. We'll just round it up there by a little bit. So underneath 1050, and that pattern has been negated, I would look at this in the grand scheme of things as just being a massive bear flag, and then boom, over time we are looking for lower. So again, just to recap here, the only reason to get bullish on Ethereum in the short term for scalps higher is a rotation up and over 1250 to start filling some of this void of structure, as we clearly saw that massive and nasty breakdown. Let's go ahead and continue along to Binance Coin. What's happening here, what you'll notice is this too also has that similar look. Again, let me put this center stage for us, of the inverted head and shoulders, something that does this. This neckline has broken, and we're also breaching that set of highs here around 234. This one has some other, more, I suppose, what's a good way to put this? It has some better overhead targets that aren't just reaching for the breakdown point as well as the resistance trend line. What you'll notice is we have this 258.70. If we go ahead and pop this on auto, scrunch this up, what you'll remember is that this had many interactions from in the past, even in here before that large lower wick and then snapback happened. That's 258.70. Okay, so if we zoom back into the chart, it does look like we could be headed into that target there. The question will, of course, be, do we roll over for a lower high and keep the daily downtrend in place, or do we truly make it up into that resistance trend line, the back test of the flush point, the scene of the crime, if you will, up closer to that 286 level from right around in here? So this one does look the best of everything that we've seen so far. And again, I will always give credit where credit is due. This one starting to make a little bit of a short-term turn. On the weekly time frame charts, though, again, if this is going to reverse trend, it's got to make it, well, it can't do this just yet, but it's got to give us a new weekly higher high, which would be up and over this. So I suppose that could be in store if we put in a bar that looks like this, or a weekly higher low. So from here to here, obviously that's a weekly lower low. It would require closing this week out, a pullback week, forming a higher low to do something like this, right? That's ultimately what it would take to change the trend here in Binance Coin. So short term, yes, bullish. Longer to medium term, not quite out of the woods yet, and obviously that's been the theme of today's video. Let's continue along and get into Cardano. This one is not quite kicking into gear like everything else, but we also know it didn't have as aggressive of a breakdown. So what you'll remember, if we just scrunch this chart way up, we're not going to put it center stage yet, is that this resistance trend line is significant because it's coming in from the all-time highs. We have multiple interactions. This is our first anchor point, touch 1 and 2 happening here, 3 and now 4 as we're getting into it sideways through time. So now let's go center stage with the recent price action here and start discussing what's unfolding. I would say in the short term, this is forming a balance area, right? It's clearly respecting the highs, it's respecting the lows. We're not really going anywhere fast. So if the Cardano market is going to break out, it's got to be a breach and run up and over 54 cents, and your target up ahead is going to be 65 cents. That would constitute a break of that big daily resistance trend line that we've been discussing. You can see we're getting into it right now. The stronger implication would be a breakthrough price. So a strong move with a green bar that would look something like this would be much more attractive than just breaking this trend line sideways through time. If we remain in this consolidation and just go sideways here, again, without any significant upward price thrusts, I would not count that as a, again, just a significant break of the resistance trend line. It's really more lackluster, just going sideways through time instead of upward via price. Don't get me wrong, this also has the possibility to remain as a descending triangle. We have not yet broken down through these lows in here, so watch this like a hawk at 44 cents on your downside move. If it breaks, we know it opens the door into 27 cents, and again, not to insult anyone's intelligence, but that's, edging close to about a 50% loss. Not quite, but certainly getting close to it. So just be mindful of the downside risk here. Even though the prices seem cheap, big percentage moves can happen at, when we're dealing with things like this. With that being said, last on the list, we've got Solana. Again, a more promising look than almost everything else we've seen so far. Let's go to the weekly. We'll start we'll do this one properly, right? We'll do a top-down analysis from the weekly, and then we'll drill down to the smaller time frames. For now on the weekly, just starting to get a little bit of a dead cat bounce. Has it reversed the weekly trend? Absolutely not. Obviously, you have a high, lower high. Well, this would be the first lower high. Second lower high. We have not bounced yet. So obviously to reverse the trend, you've got to come all the way up here towards 140. Is that going to happen over the course of the week? I don't really think so. We can laugh at this if in the comments if I'm just completely wrong and we see an absolutely massive rally in crypto, but I would say the odds don't favor that, right? If this is going to flip the trend the other way, so put in a higher low, obviously it means next week we've got to pull back and respect a higher low above these levels we have here closer to 26 even. With that being said, we'll drill down to the daily now and start talking about a little bit more nuance in terms of the levels and what's going on here. If you look at this in the same light as almost everything else we've seen so far, this did not put in the inverted head and shoulders, but instead the higher low double bottom. So here's a set of lows. Here's a higher set of lows after putting in a neckline for the bounce. We have breached and taken out the neckline of that pattern, and obviously we're getting a little bit of follow through to the upside. The beauty about this higher low double bottom and the fact that we're recapturing this specific neckline at 37 was that this was also the flush point from in here. So that's also negating some of the selling pressure that we saw on that initial thrust downward. This to me is even more promising than the little bit of a turn we've seen in Ethereum and even Binance Coin as of right now because of the recapture of this level right here. So if you're going to watch anything, maybe Solana turns into the leader here over the course of the next week or so. You'll notice also from a percentage standpoint, it is the one with the most relative strength. So going forward, what do we want to see? Now that we've recaptured 37, we've obviously got to stay above it. So any pullbacks on these smaller time frames like on the daily, the hourly, the 30-minute, want to hold above that, higher low, and continue on our merry way to the upside. I would say the next major upside level that we want to watch out for is right around in here, simply because if we look at this as a range, it's fairly close to the 50% mark, and also notice that we had support, which then flipped into resistance. So that has many more, there's much more technical nuance around that as opposed to just picking out this level right here. So upside, we are looking for about 48 as a target. When and if we get there, expect the pullback. If we put in another higher low, fantastic. Maybe the trend does start to reverse here, but again, still some work to be doing from that higher time frame on the weekly that we just saw. If you're intent on drawing a new trend line and marking off these higher lows, as long as we're above that white dotted line we've just drawn in, fine. Technically speaking, we are respecting the new and budding uptrend that's forming here on the daily time frame. So with all of that being said, please don't misconstrue any of the smaller time frame reversals that we've talked about for big, massive reversals in the crypto market. Obviously, if we scrunch up the daily time frame, it's pretty tough to say anything other than this still remains in a downtrend. With that being said, that's going to wrap up the video. Don't forget to vote on the t-shirts. Today is the last day to indicate your interest for those over on the YouTube community poll or in the Discord. We're going to make an order. That way we can get them for the 25K sub mark. And with that being said, I wish you all a green trading week.